Hello, we're going to have a story time, and because we're talking about Jack and the Beanstalk this week and thinking about giants, I've got another story with a giant in it. Now, the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk is not a very nice giant. He likes eating little boys and girls, doesn't he? And what does he say? Can you remember what he says in the story? He says, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." But in this story, this is about a really nice giant, a friendly giant, and it's called The Smartest Giant in Town. And some of you might have heard of this story. It's a really good one. It's written by a lady called Julia Donaldson. That's the author who's written the book. And she's written some really good stories, like The Gruffalo and Stickman. So you might know those stories as well. And on the cover, we can see the giant's great big feet and his great big long legs, can't we? And we can see some little animals there. So let's have a read of this story and see what happens. The Smartest Giant in Town. George was a giant. Can you see how big he is? He's much bigger than those houses, isn't he? The scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals. You can see sandals there on his feet. And the same old patched up gown. He's got an old gown on. It's a bit like a dress, and there's been holes in it that have been fixed with patches. "I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town," he said sadly. But one day, George noticed a brand new shop. It was full of smart clothes. So he bought a smart shirt, a pair of smart trousers, a smart belt, a smart stripy tie, some smart socks with diamonds up the sides, and a pair of smart shiny shoes. "Now I'm the smartest giant in town," he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop, and he was just about to go home when he heard a sound. On the pavement stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. He's very tall, isn't he? You can see how tall George is. If you've ever seen the giraffes at Blackpool Zoo, you know how tall they are. So if George is the same size of them, he's very big indeed. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a long, warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his stripy tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, and he wound it round and round the giraffe's neck. It made a wonderful scarf. "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode towards home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look me up and down, I'm the smartest giant in town." George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. That rhymes, doesn't it? Goat and boat. Can you see the goat on the boat there? "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a brand new strong sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said, as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. It made a magnificent sail. "Thank you," said the goat. George strode on, singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on a boat is a sail for a goat, but look me up and down, I'm the smartest giant in town." Doesn't look quite as smart now, does he? But he's being very kind. George came to a tiny ruined house. Can you see the house there? What do you think's happened to it? It does look a state, doesn't it? Beside the house stood a family of little white mice with lots of baby mice. Can you see the little mice? They stood squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down, and now we have nowhere to live. Oh, I wish we had a nice new house." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said, as the mouse and her baby scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. Can you see there? Thank you, they squeaked. George had to hop along down the road, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself, my tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on the boat is a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, but look me up and down, I'm the smartest giant in town. Doesn't look quite as smart. George then came to a campsite. Can you see the campsite there? And a campsite is somewhere that you can go on holiday to with a tent or a caravan. You might have been on holiday to a campsite before. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. Can you see the fox crying? Oh dear. What's the matter? Asked George. It's my sleeping bag, said the fox. I dropped it in a puddle. Oh no, I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag. Cheer up, said George, and he took off one of his socks with the diamonds up the sides. It was tickling my toes anyway, he said, and the fox snuggled into it. It made a very fine sleeping bag. There he is in his sleeping bag. Thank you, said the fox. George hopped on, singing to himself, my tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on the boat is a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, one of my socks is a bed for a fox, but look me up and down, I'm the smartest giant in town. George came to a big squelchy bog. Beside the bog stood a dog. That's another rhyming word, isn't it? Bog, dog, who was howling. There he is. Can you see the dog? And a bog is a very, very muddy place, like a muddy field. It's all squelchy. What's the matter? Asked George. It's this bog, said the dog. I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path. Cheer up, said George, and he took off his smart new belt. It was squashing my tummy anyway, he said, and he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. Thank you, said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on, singing to himself, my tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, my shirt's on the boat is a sail for a goat, my shoe is a house for a little white mouse, one of my socks is a bed for a fox, my belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog, but... Oh, my trousers are falling down. That's because he's taken off his belt that was holding them up. I'm the coldest giant in town. Suddenly, George felt sad and shivery and not at all smart. He stood on one foot and thought, I'll have to go back to the shop and buy some more clothes, he decided. So he turned round and hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. Uh-oh. Oh no, cried George. He sank down onto the doorstep and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all the animals he had met on the way home. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw a bag with something familiar poking out the top. George took a closer look. My gown, he yelled. My dear old gown and sandals. George put them on. They felt wonderfully comfortable. I'm the cosiest giant in town, he cried, and he danced back home along the road. Outside his front door stood all the animals that he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. Come on, George, they said. Open it. George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and a card. You see, he's got the crown on. Look inside the card, George, said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. And here's the beautiful card that they've made. And can you see they've drawn all beautiful pictures of all the things he's done to help? And the card says, your tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. And one of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town. So that story is a lovely story about a really kind giant who shared all his brand new things. I wonder if you can do some really good sharing and helping at your house too. I hope you enjoyed the story. and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.